So today, let's talk about the great transformation that we are living today. So in the 2020s, key technologies are converging that will disrupt the 5 foundational sectors of the economy: information, energy, transportation, and materials. These are phase change disruptions, and I'll explain what that means. But if all you do is walk away with that concept, then that is what explains what is going on in the world. And phase change disruptions are happening at all levels: at the product level, at the sector level, at the economy, and even all of society.
This is one of the most important videos I'll ever post on this channel. Of course, I haven't done the heavy lifting. That's on Tony. What a legend. I want to make sure that I amplify these ideas and broadcast this to a large audience because people need to hear this. If you own Tesla stock or any automotive stocks, you must understand these critically important concepts. I'm not joking when I say this is one of the most important videos I've ever posted on this channel. The implications are profound. Speaking of important videos, you're not going to believe this, but I dropped 2 exclusive videos on Patreon this morning, both way too spicy for YouTube. I mean, I did tell you guys I was taking over Patreon, so you shouldn't be surprised, but if you haven't seen those already and you're on Patreon, I implore you, please watch both of today's videos, especially the most recent. And if you aren't on Patreon, it's only a matter of time till you join, so may as well put yourself out of the misery and click the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment. Now, let's get straight into it.
So I am going to distill 6 publications, books, and reports that I've published over the last few years in this presentation. And I'm going to start with how disruption really works. What are the patterns of change, big change, and transformation? So we live in an equilibrium, meaning let's talk about a sector, for instance. Our electricity grid has been there for about 100 years. And there's been innovation within the grid. There's been new types of electricity generation technologies, but the grid has more or less stayed the same over the last 100 years, an equilibrium.
So roughly a century, not much change, sounds ripe for disruption. Anyone know any companies that may be possibly in a place, a situation, a position to disrupt the electrical grid? You know, like virtual power plants, software to perform energy arbitrage, to pull energy off peak, store in a battery, sell back to the grid during on peak, participate in virtual power plants as a distributed utility. Anyone know any companies that have already built out some of the infrastructure and technology to begin disrupting the energy grid? Nah, neither do I. I kind of wish there was one because I'd probably buy their stock.
But at the same time as there is an equilibrium in a certain value chain, technologies are improving in cost and capabilities. Every technology is improving. Almost every technology is improving in cost and capability at different rates. So solar PV improves at a certain rate, lithium-ion batteries improve at a certain rate, computing improves at a certain rate.
So, according to this genius over here, solar is improving at a certain, aka a predictable rate. Lithium-ion batteries are improving at a predictable rate. So too computers. That's such a crazy idea. I mean, if that was true, which is obviously not true, fake news, hello, fact check false. If that were actually true, then wouldn't it mean that there would be some companies out there who would have, I don't know, used their brains a little bit and thought, if those things are predictably declining in costs over time, that means we can predict what the costs will be in a future point in time. And if they're lower than they are today, and they're going to keep getting lower and it's predictable, doesn't that mean that we could kind of know roughly what it's going to cost in the future and then see an opportunity there and start pursuing that opportunity? But of course, what he said is false. Otherwise, there'd be companies out there named after famous inventors who had actually been aware of these predictable cost declines on said technologies and built enormous multi-billion, potentially in the future multi-trillion-dollar businesses on the top of said opportunities. Of course, if what he said is true, then obviously legacy automotive manufacturers would have realized this as well, especially on the predictably declining battery costs, and thought, if these battery costs continue to predictably decline over time, doesn't that mean that those electric vehicles that currently aren't cost competitive in terms of the range and the purchase price will eventually become cost competitive and then so much better value that consumers will literally need to be suffering from brain damage to buy ICE vehicles? And if that's the case, should we not then go all in on EVs ASAP to avoid imminent bankruptcy in the 2030s? Of course, this is all hypothetical because obviously what he said is definitely not true. Battery costs, solar costs, and computing power is not predictably declining and or improving. There's nothing predictable about this. I mean, after all, if it were true, surely all of the experts with their predictions would have taken this into account and not been completely wrong about literally everything.
And at some point, they converge to open up a vast new possibility space. So what is possible essentially changes, both on the collapse and on the creation side. Everything changes. But the incumbents don't see it. The incumbents don't see it. Entrepreneurs do, artists do, but incumbents don't see it.
You did it, Mary. You failed to see it, and it matters.
Entrepreneurs come in. So think about Tesla in 2010, or the solar companies and battery companies that were started around that time, because they saw that possibility space open up. So they come in, they start companies, they develop products and services that improve in cost and capability over the following few years. And at some point, that product or service hits a rupture point. It ruptures that equilibrium. That equilibrium does not exist anymore. The old rules don't apply anymore. Now, the new rules may not be clear, but the old rules don't apply anymore. That's what's happening today in many sectors, in energy, in transportation, in food, and so on. Once we rupture that system, we go into disequilibrium. So the old brakes don't work anymore. And in fact, the old brakes may actually serve to accelerate. The old accelerators actually accelerate even more. And that's why adoption happens as S-curves. Because when the old brakes don't work and the accelerators do, then adoption increases exponentially.
So enough with my obnoxious sarcasm. On a very serious note, this is the crux of the entire video, the entire message within this single statement. We're talking about exponential adoption. As I've said in the past, human beings suck shit at thinking exponentially. This has clear and obvious ties to our evolutionary history. We live in a linear world. Prior to technology, the idea of anything exponential ever just wasn't a thing. You walk in the plains of Africa, you see a lion. You think to yourself, how many steps away is that motherfucker from where I am? Okay, don't let it get any closer than here. If it gets closer than here, I'm fucked. But if it's further than that, I can run away. Everything's fine. How many steps away is this motherfucker? Things get ridiculous and completely unintuitive when we talk about exponentials, because human beings do not live in an exponential world. At least we didn't evolve in one, but now we do. Case in point. If you take 30 linear steps of 1 meter each, take 30 linear steps, you end up 30 meters away from your starting point. If you take 30 exponential steps, as in 1 meter, then 2 meters, then 4 meters, then 8, doubling every time, you end up just slightly more than 30 meters away from your starting point. And what I mean is you'll circle the earth multiple times, and then after that, end up a few meters away from your original starting point after literally circling the earth multiple times first. Not a single person, had I asked previously, how far would you walk if you took 30 exponential steps, would have been even close, not even in the same order of magnitude, because we suck at understanding exponential growth. This is why it's so important to use your brain and a calculator and look at the data and the evidence instead of intuiting what you think might happen. Because if you use your intuition to try to intuit something about exponentials, it's not going to work. You're going to be so far off the mark, it's embarrassing, and then you're going to look like an absolute fucking moron. Case in point, literally every CEO of every automotive manufacturer on the goddamn planet, except of course Tesla, who actually, instead of using their intuition, used their brains and numbers and did some thinking, drew some conclusions, and are almost single-handedly responsible for disrupting the entire automotive industry.
So the new emerges with higher level of capabilities and many times at a lower cost per unit, and the old essentially crashes.
Pretty sure, we guys listening, I think what he just said was rest in peace legacy automotive manufacturers, all going bankrupt before the end of the decade. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he said. I'm pretty sure that was a direct quote, word for word, I swear.
So the new eventually becomes the new equilibrium. So think about electric vehicles and so on. They're going to become a new equilibrium, but it's not what you think. It's not a one-to-one substitution, because that's a phase change disruption. But that new system will become a new equilibrium with new rules and new dynamics and new patterns. Let's start with how to understand how disruptions happen. Let's start with technology cost curves. So back in 2014, I published a book called Clean Disruption of Energy and Transportation, and I published this exact cost curve for lithium-ion batteries out to 2030. And you can't imagine how I was trolled for publishing that. $125 per kilowatt hour by 2022, it's never gonna happen. What are you smoking, right?
Funnily enough, on a personal matter, I too can relate to being trolled for making what sound like absolutely absurd predictions at the time that later turn out to be on the f***ing money. Let's take a moment here, credit where it's due, Tony Seba is literally one of the OGs of actually having a fucking brain and using it. He's been calling this shit to a T for the last decade. He does not get enough credit for this. This guy's been screaming from the rooftops, banging the drum. Hey guys, electric vehicles, clean energy, here's the numbers, here's the stats, here's the cost curves, hello, the experts are wrong, let me explain why, look. Literally no one listened. Eventually, they will be listening. The same people who trolled this guy, oh, you're a fucking idiot, what are you talking about, bro? The same people that running automotive companies that will soon be driving them bankrupt, driving them, get it, because that was bad, I'll just leave it. Bad joke's better than no joke, right? It takes courage and confidence to stand up and scream from the rooftops something you know you'll be mocked and ridiculed for, because people just don't get it. They're unwilling to even think. They'll just automatically dismiss you as crazy until it turns out you were right. The fact that Tony's been consistent in his messaging for a decade, massive credit where it's due.
And here we are. It's been almost exactly what I forecast. Cost curves are like gravity. I don't care what your opinion is. Cost curves are like gravity. They will happen. The cost curve of lithium-ion batteries is going exactly as I predicted. But the big disruptions, the phase change disruptions, happen because of something that I call technology convergence. Now, what is a convergence? Let's go back to 2007. The iPhone and Android basically became possible. Both of them happened the same year, 2007. But why not 2003 or 2010? Why 2007? That's because the technologies that made a $600 smartphone possible essentially converged 2007. And that's when Apple and Google came into the space and essentially developed a smartphone, and now they're both multi-trillion-dollar companies. So technology convergence opens up the possibility space. The other lesson is that neither Apple nor Google had ever built a phone before. So disruptions, the phase change disruptions, happen from the edge, not from the center.
Yes, and yes, he's absolutely right, and this is such an important point. Disruptions almost never happen from within. They're almost always from somebody, a company, on the edge, the outside, the periphery. Countless examples of this. Incumbents get stuck in their own ways, their own way of thinking. Then they start getting a gigantic fucking circle jerk. Yep, I agree, everything. Yep, everything's fine. Yep, I agree with you. You agree with me. No dissent, no dissenting opinions. Okay, great, everything's fine. Next minute, they're out of business because they didn't see shit, because they got too comfortable and cozy with the way things are. If you as a company are not continually trying to put yourself out of business by disrupting your own technology, your own products, your own innovations, you eventually will be disrupted by a company that is attempting to disrupt your own technology, your own products, your own innovations, your own services. It's just how things work. There are countless examples of this. And on the topic of Tesla, which is highly relevant to this video, most of you, after all, do own Tesla stock. Tesla themselves are constantly trying to disrupt their own products. You notice the S and X come out and they go, well, you know what? We need a cheaper, higher production vehicle. Let's cannibalize our own products, the S and X, by introducing one that's basically half the price to 3 and Y. And they're about to do it again with a more affordable Tesla. Most Harvard MBAs would have a heart attack at the very idea of creating a product that's going to cannibalize sales from one of your other existing products. It's a money printer. But if you do not continually focus on disrupting yourself, somebody else will eventually do it.
The incumbents at the time, Motorola, remember them? BlackBerry, remember them? They could have got into the space, but they did not see it coming. Microsoft did not see it coming. They actually dismissed the smartphone loudly. So this is the technology convergence. And if you look at that, the adoption of the smartphone happened as an S-curve. So I've been following a number of key technologies for many years, and these technologies are a subset of the ones that in convergence at different sectors at different times are essentially disrupting everything over the next 10, 15 years.
Let's play a fun little game called How Many of These Apply to Tesla? Let's run down the list on screen now. Number 1, artificial intelligence and machine learning. Do these apply to Tesla? Hell fucking yes. Notice it's also the top of the list. Number 2, precision biology. Nah, not relevant, at least not yet. 3, robotics. Hell fucking yes. Solar. Hell fucking yes. Batteries. Hell fucking yes. Sensors. Hell fucking yes. Now, Tony hasn't mentioned specifically whether or not these are in order of priority and potential to disrupt, but spoiler alert, they obviously are. I mean, it's obvious. AI and precision biology, literally the two most important disruptive technologies of the next couple of decades, are number 1 and 2. How many of these apply to government motors? Count them. I mean, seriously. It's a fun exercise.
When a possibility space opens up, new business model innovation also becomes possible, not only new products. So think about Uber, which was started in an apartment here in San Francisco in 2009, exactly 2 years after the iPhone came out. Is that coincidence? Not at all. 2 years after. That's because the iPhone opened up the possibility space for ride-hailing. Actually, the iPhone and the internet and so on. And if you think about it, Uber had more bookings than the whole taxi industry in America within just 7 years. And that's another lesson. Disruptions in foundational sectors like transportation or energy do happen very quickly. In this case, 7 years. They disrupted the taxi industry in America.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but does anyone kind of get the feeling that maybe we're about to see round 2 of the taxi / now the Uber industry being disrupted? Autonomy, robo-taxis, hail on demand? Yeah, nah, it's probably nothing.
And that's not all. Of course, they've gone on to disrupt other industries. And S-curve, market adoption S-curve. Technology adoption always happens as S-curves if they're successful. If not, they just crash, right? So back to the car and the horse. In 13 years, we saw those pictures in New York City. At the level of the United States of America, adoption of the car went from essentially nil to about 95% of miles within 20 years. And it happened as an S-curve. That's not the big thing. It went from about 10% to about 80% in just 10 years, in just 1 decade. In just 1 decade, the bulk of that transportation disruption happened despite building those 2 industries, the auto industry and the oil industry, despite building a new road infrastructure, despite fighting World War I and the meanest influenza pandemic in history. So despite all of these things, the bulk of the major transportation disruption of the 20th century happened, the bulk within 10 years.
So I think what he's trying to say is Toyota's current plans of about 2/3 of all of their vehicles sold in 2030 still being internal combustion engine vehicles is definitely not a problem. There's nothing to see here, and they're definitely not going bankrupt as a result of this incompetence. I think that's what he's trying to say. And I'm pretty sure by extension that also means the brain-dead internal combustion engine vehicle manufacturers who still have plans to be producing ICE vehicles beyond 2030, some of them beyond 2035, also have nothing to worry about because disruption takes time.
So anyone who tells you that major disruptions cannot happen in 10 to 15 years is not looking at the evidence. We have uncovered dozens of cases in many industries throughout time of disruptions that have happened in 10 to 15 years, from healthcare to materials, to transportation, energy, and so on. And if anything, S-curves are accelerating. Disruptions that may have taken decades in the past, now they're taking place in years, maybe even months. So again, anyone who tells you that a major disruption cannot happen in 10 to 15 years
may be suffering from clear signs of brain damage. Oh, sorry, I interrupted Tony. I'm not sure. Let him finish his thought. Sorry, that was rude, wasn't it? I won't interrupt again, I promise.
is not looking at the evidence. The mainstream keeps pushing this linearity. I mean, the EIA, look at their forecasts, 20 years of forecasts in solar PV. Every year they've been wrong by 30 to 40% because they just extrapolate.
Hey guys, so I've just done a search for the definition of being consistently wrong by 20 to 30% year after year. We're here on the Google definition thing. So what is the definition of being consistently wrong by 20 to 30% year after year? Brain damage. And we've got a use case here. Quote, "You are suffering from brain damage. Stop making predictions, you stupid motherfucker." As you can see, I mean, it's obviously real. I didn't do anything funny here. So I think I don't need to say anything else. It's all here.
They draw a straight line into the future, and they say this is the adoption of solar until 2040 or 2050, just a straight line. But never ever is adoption of...
On screen now, I just wanted to highlight something very important. Notice, these are predictions, conventional forecasts in grey versus the reality in green. And as you can see, these linear forecasts are beyond embarrassing. Case in point, some of the earlier forecasts here predicting, I don't know, best guess, maybe 50 gigawatt hours, if I'm being generous, of solar by 2030. whereas that level was reached around 2009 and then quickly exceeded 10 times that idiotic prediction of 500 megawatts by about 2015, 2016. And every time these fuckwits don't learn, the curve starts moving up exponentially and they just go, well, it's going to go linear from here because we've been wrong about everything with our linear extrapolations previously, but we're just going to keep doing the same dumb shit and being wrong. The margin of error is astonishing. These aren't little tiny mistakes. They're colossal errors to the point of embarrassment. I mean, IEA World Energy should be fucking disgraced. I mean, give up. Just quit. Give up, okay? If you're this wrong for this long, consistently in the same direction, you've learned something about your predictions. Not only are they inaccurate, they are so wrong, it is truly embarrassing. If I had anything to do with these predictions, I would be ashamed. Literally ashamed of myself. How can you be this wrong for this long and keep making the exact same fucking mistake? Oh, I know. Because when you're an expert, that's all that matters. If you're an expert, your expert predictions are infallible. And if they're wrong, don't need to reassess, just make another prediction next year and be wrong again and then another. Of course, the hilarious part is many people outsource their thinking to so-called experts and rely upon these idiotic forecasts. That's why most of these moronic automotive companies didn't see EVs coming, and now it's too late. They didn't do their own thinking. They relied upon the experts. Never outsource your thinking on anything that matters to anyone. If you're a long-term viewer of this channel, you may have noticed I have an intense disdain for so-called experts who don't know what the fuck they are talking about. There's nothing wrong with having no idea what you're talking about, as long as you explain that you have no idea what you're talking about. I don't really know anything, but here's what I think I know. But see, the problem is, experts, and I don't just include the agencies forecasting EV adoption, battery growth, and so on. I also refer to everybody who automatically assumes a position of authority. They're an expert by default. They are automatically pedestalized by their very position. For example, a sharp-dressed guy in makeup wearing a nice suit on CNBS is automatically credible because he's on the television and he's wearing a suit and he's clean-shaven, therefore I can trust him. Oh, this person's a politician. They're definitely not a raging narcissist with an intense need for power and control who'll do whatever it takes to become elected and remain elected. They're a politician. I can trust them because they're a politician. Oh, my government told me to do something. Well, it's my government. I can trust them because they're the government. They're an authority. They're the experts. I'll just do what they say because they know best. I could rattle off 1,000 other examples, but you guys get the point. That also includes dickheads on YouTube. Oh, by the way, here's a pro tip. I don't know if you guys have realized this. You probably didn't. I didn't explain it, but here's a fact. You notice that I look like a fucking dickhead? I sound like a fucking dickhead. I don't shave that often. Dumbass backwards hat, t-shirt, film in my fucking kitchen. Why do I do that? It's an intentional strategy to ensure that people don't unintentionally pedestalize me because I'm some guy on YouTube. If I was trying to get your trust and fake you into thinking that I know what I'm talking about, I'd have a nice suit, I'd never swear, I'd be clean shaven, I'd never share my thoughts and opinions so abrasively. Instead, I'd be the thing I thought I needed to be, to automatically assume a position of authority and credibility over you minions watching me on YouTube because I'm the expert because I'm on YouTube. You know, it does feel good to finally explain the YouTube strategy here. I've intentionally done my best to avoid people putting me unnecessarily on a pedestal. The hilarious thing I get in the comments sometimes from people, well-meaning, I'm sure.
Nobody can take you seriously with your hat backwards, bro. What the f*** is wrong with you, man? Take your hat off. Stop f***ing swearing. No one's gonna take you seriously if you swear all the time. Do you not understand?
I just wanted to put that out there. The only time a so-called expert should be given any credibility whatsoever is if they are, in fact, wait for it, credible through their predictions and their actions, their track record, not their appearance, or the situation in which you find them, for example, presenting news and information in the mainstream media. Therefore, they must be credible, right? Wrong.
New technologies never ever are disruptions linear. They're S-curves, right? So if you look at the green line, which is reality, it's starting to look like an S-curve. That's solar PV. And the opposite is true, the collapse. So if you look at some of the forecasts for coal in America by the US Department of Energy, essentially every year they're saying that coal is going to flatten.
Again, I just want to make sure everybody is paying attention to these embarrassing predictions on screen now. The predictions versus the reality. This is farcical. This is an indictment on the absolute incompetence of these so-called expert forecasts. They're not off by a little bit. They're off by a catastrophic, embarrassing margin. Yet they still don't learn every year. Oh, well, we'll just do the same shit we did last year. Don't need to learn anything. Don't need to think about why we were so wrong last year and the year before and the year before. Because we're the experts.
So they draw a flat line into the future. But in fact, if you look at the black dots, coal is collapsing as it should, as an inverted S-curve, right? So the reality is that adoption takes place as S-curves of the new, and collapse of the old also happens as S-curves, as inverted S-curves. So here's the question. Why do smart people in smart organizations. Very smart people, former entrepreneurs, billionaires, and so on, fail to anticipate and let alone lead market disruptions. The incumbent mindset, linear, reductionist, mechanistic, they just don't see new opportunity spaces open up. They just extrapolate from the present into a future that is essentially a mirage.
God damn, what a great line. They essentially extrapolate into the future. The future, of course, that they're extrapolating into is a mirage. Well said, Tony.
Plus or minus, right? With incremental changes. And like I said, disruptions don't work that way. And that's why these companies collapse. And when they do, they collapse very quickly.
Would this be an appropriate opportunity to bring up legacy automotive manufacturers, or is that a little bit too much of a low blow, too awkward and too obvious?
And I call that market trauma. And market trauma means that financial collapse can happen early, quickly, and disproportionately. So if you think about General Electric, one of the premier industrial companies of the 20th century, essentially GE Power collapsed in 2018. Even though solar, wind, and batteries were just a couple of percent of the market, right? They did not see the quick adoption, but the collapse of their valuation happened very quickly. The stock market valuation dropped by more than 70% in a year, and it has never really recovered.
So I guess this would also be a really bad time to troll some of the brain-dead stock analysts on Wall Street who are currently recommending investors buy legacy automotive manufacturer stocks because they're great deals. Yeah, it's too easy. I won't.
One of the premier industrial companies of the 20th century, which had all the information in the world. They were in the wind turbine market, and they did not see the disruption. Phase change disruption leads to new systems with new properties. And this is what's happening in food, energy, transportation, information, materials, and so on. These are not just substitutions of the old. These are brand new systems, right? So back to the car and the horse. We saw that from the early 1900s to about 1925, the car over 20 years went from almost nil to about 95% of the market. And of course, the market share of the horse collapsed as an inverted S-curve. At the time, Ford famously said that if he had asked what the market wanted, they said a faster horse. To them, the car was a faster horse, right? It was a one-to-one substitution of the horse, only faster. But we know that is not the case, right? The car transportation system was a brand new system, new properties, new dynamics, new metrics, new size. Even by the late 2020s, the car market was hundreds of times larger than the horse market ever was. And it created a whole new system. And not just in transportation. We built the 20th century around car and oil, right? And electricity. But the car changed everything in the 20th century, not just for transportation. It changed everything for society. We built cities around the car. The geopolitics of the 20th century were based on petroleum, still are, if you think about it, right? And the petroleum, of course, was the source of energy for the internal combustion engine car. Governance changed, politics changed, the economy changed because of the car. So these are phase change disruptions with cascading ripple effects. So a way to think about it is that a butterfly is not a faster caterpillar.
But Tesla is just a car company.
A new system. It's a new life form, if you will. And if you think that you can add wings to a caterpillar and you have a butterfly, well, that's what a lot of incumbents think.
He's too f***ing good, this guy. He's too f***ing good. Case in point, if you've been following the Tesla story for a long time, give or take a decade, you'll have seen the same idiotic comments from the same idiotic people who do think you can stick wings on a caterpillar and suddenly it's a butterfly. What do I mean? Literally every single dipshit ever who said, oh, the competition is coming, and their reasoning was, well, these companies make ICE vehicles, aka caterpillars. All they need to do is stick some wings on, like Tesla's doing, and suddenly they're making butterflies. It's not that simple, as these companies are only just starting to discover.
But again, a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings, right? It needs to go through a phase transformation to become a butterfly. And when it does, it can fly. It's a new system with new metrics, new properties. It eats different, it behaves differently, right? So tastes and preferences change because of phase change transformation. When the car disrupted the horse, what happened to all those horses that were disrupted? We ate them. Now, not you and me, of course, but we ate them. Transportation became food. Think about it. Think about how preferences and tastes change. So the smartphone, the internet, and the cloud did not just disrupt information technology, which of course they did. They actually, if you think about the car itself, they're unbundling the value of the car, of the individually owned car. And I'll come back to that later. The value for our parents of the car included things like dating and mating.
He ain't wrong. What's the saying? If the cars are rockin', don't come knockin'.
Right? But we don't need a car for that anymore. We have dating apps. We used to go to the movies. Now we can stream. We used to eat at restaurants and we needed cars to take us there. We don't anymore, right? Groceries, we have delivery. Work, now we work from home, at least some of the time. And more that's going to be the case. So a lot of the sources of value of the individually owned car are being destroyed by information technology. And that's happening today. And that happened even before the major disruption of transportation.
Brilliant presentation. So many important nuggets there. This guy gets it, making him one of the few on planet Earth. I still do not think most people, even those watching this channel, understand how violent this disruption will be and how much carnage will lay in its wake. This is not hyperbole. Those of you with access to my Tesla valuation model have seen my own estimates for Tesla's progress in terms of delivery growth and so on. Beautiful S-curve. Of course, my predictions sound completely insane. People laugh at my price targets, but much like Tony Seba revisiting his 2014 predictions, I think I'll be doing the same thing in 2032 of my own. I admit, I'm biased. I have a bit of a thing for people who understand and appreciate facts, data, information, and also, most important of all, actually have a brain that functions rather than malfunctions. It's very rare to find these people, unfortunately. At least, I haven't found too many in my own life, but they do exist. Tony is a great example. This guy's on the money. He's been consistent, consistently right, and consistently going against the grain for the last decade. As he mentioned, he got trolled hard back in 2014. He still gets trolled hard today. Of course, those doing the trolling today may not be around tomorrow. Something to consider. If you know anyone who needs to hear this message, somebody who's still got their head up their ass, they think that people are going to be driving ICE vehicles in 2035, the original source is in the description if you don't want the F-bombs and the abrasive comments, or you can send them this if you think they can handle it. But in either case, this is a very important video with a lot of important messages, and I implore every single Tesla stock investor, in particular, do your homework understanding cost curves and the adoption of new disruptive technologies. There is a reason, after all, I continue to pour every spare cent into Tesla stock. Alright, now before you guys go, I need some help making a decision. I'm just trying to decide, should I post a third exclusive video on Patreon today or just leave it at 2 exclusive videos? No, really, let me know in the comments below. I do have a third already recorded, ready to drop. Should I do it? If I do, that'll make it 190 exclusive videos and counting, of course. If you're not already a member on Patreon, 1, you're missing out, and 2, it's only a matter of time until you join. I'm going to get you eventually. If you're finally ready to atone for your sins and correct for that error of judgment, you can do so by joining Patreon with the card in the corner or the link in the pinned comment, and I'll see you over there. Love ya.